Ever get that feeling? Like you're drowning in information.
Oh, yeah.
But you still want. Like that deep understanding.
You want that aha moment without being overwhelmed.
Exactly. That's what we're going for today.
That's a deep dive
into something so powerful, but maybe we don't think about it enough.
The power of silence.
And we're not just making this up.
No, we're looking at this through a very specific lens.
A Nietzschean lens.
Yeah. We've gone through a bunch of stuff for this.
Oh, yeah.
Transcripts from YouTube.
Channels like
Psychotic.
Catharsis.
Psyche and Wisdom.
Psychophil.
And Whispering Ideas.
All dealing with this idea of
power.
And how not speaking
can be the most impactful thing you can do.
So our mission for you, the listener, is to cut through all that noise.
All that information overload.
And give you the why.
And the how.
Of silence as a tool.
For personal power.
Influence.
Even control.
Okay, so much of the time we think that power comes from
speaking up.
Being the loudest voice in the room.
Having the strongest opinions.
But what if that's not the whole story?
It is a very common perception. The one who wins every argument.
Right.
The one who speaks the loudest.
Yeah.
Seems to have all the power.
But our sources, they're pointing at something else.
A counter-argument.
True power comes from knowing.
When to be silent.
And Psychotic and Catharsis, they get into this.
Deeply. You see, for Nietzsche, knowledge comes from
stepping back. Silence is that space
where you can observe the dynamics at play.
So there's a kind of strength and reserve.
Right.
This need to constantly justify or explain.
To always be ready with a response.
It kind of shows.
Insecurity.
Like you need that validation from other people.
Psychophil and Whispering Ideas touch on this.
All this reactivity. It can be a weakness.
It's driven by the ego.
The need to be heard.
The more you talk, the more you give away.
Right.
About what you're really thinking.
What bothers you.
Psychotic really dives deep into this.
So silence isn't just passive.
It's not speaking. It's active observation.
Analysis.
Leading to control.
If you're not always talking.
You can actually take in what's happening.
You can analyze.
Without having to hear yourself talk.
Right.
And that gives you a huge advantage.
The person who's always talking, they miss what everyone else is doing.
They're predictable.
But the silent observer, they have the element of surprise.
They can choose their words carefully.
Psychotic called it surgical.
Precise.
Like a scalpel.
Are there examples of this in history?
Oh, tons.
Our sources bring up some great ones.
Socrates.
Psychotic.
Catharsis.
And Psychophil.
All talk about him.
He didn't win arguments by being loud.
No.
He would ask these pointed questions.
And then
silence.
Making the other person face their inconsistency.
So it wasn't about shouting.
Right.
It was the strategic lack of a rebuttal.
Wow.
That forced self-reflection.
And that gave him control.
Control of the entire conversation.
And then there's Steve Jobs.
Mentioned by so many.
The long pauses.
The pregnant pauses.
And when he finally did speak.
His words had so much more weight.
It wasn't just a stream of information.
It was considered
deliberate.
The silence beforehand made it impactful.
And Miyamoto Musashi.
The legendary samurai.
Psychotic.
Catharsis.
And Psychophil talk about him.
His mastery wasn't just his swordsmanship.
It was his patience.
His emotional control.
And his use of silence.
To completely unnerve his opponents.
Okay, so we've seen the good side of silence.
Right.
But what about the opposite? The dangers of oversharing.
What's so interesting is how talking too much can be such a problem.
Yeah.
Every word, every sentence can reveal your weaknesses.
Your fears.
Your insecurities.
Psychotic highlights.
Think about it.
Okay.
The more you talk, the more people can figure you out.
Your vulnerabilities.
Right.
It's like an information leak.
The less you say, the less they know.
And powerful people, they seem to get this.
They speak only when necessary.
And silence is an empty space for them.
It's a tool.
Yeah.
To emphasize their point.
But so many of us, we're afraid of silence.
Oh, yeah.
We want to fill it.
It can be socially awkward.
Psychotic and Catharsis both talk about
the need to fill the silence.
Because we're uncomfortable.
But they also talk about how mastering that discomfort can give you power.
You don't need that constant validation.
Right. You're not looking for approval.
It's like we've been conditioned to.
Keep talking.
Keep the conversation going.
To always have something to say.
But real strength, maybe it's being able to be silent.
Silence is self-control.
Yeah. Psychotic and Catharsis talk about this.
It's choosing not to react.
To hold back those impulses.
It's strength.
It's self-mastery.
You're in control.
You're not ruled by the moment.
It's about emotional regulation.
If you always react without thinking,
you lose control.
Psychotic, Catharsis, Psychophil.
They all say that.
True strength isn't about winning every argument.
It's about knowing which battles to fight.
And which ones to just meet with silence.
Psychotic brings up this idea of strategic invisibility.
Oh, what's it?
Knowing when to step back.
When to be less present.
And then reappear when you want to.
So it's kind of like hide and seek.
In a way.
But with bigger consequences.
Right.
So if you're always around,
people start to expect you.
You become predictable.
And you lose your impact.
But if you become less available,
you create
you become more valuable.
Psychotic uses great examples. Wow. Steve Jobs with his product launches.
Oh, yeah.
Miyamoto Musashi appearing on the battlefield just when he wanted to.
Okay.
Even Da Vinci working in solitude and then revealing his masters.
Okay. It's like absence makes the heart grow fonder.
But it's deliberate.
It's on purpose.
Right.
And we're afraid of being forgotten if we're not always around.
Right.
But psychotic says we need to reframe that.
To see it as a way to control the narrative.
And make a bigger impact when you do return.
And that takes patience.
Which psychotic calls a weapon.
It's resisting that need to react.
It's planning for the long term.
While everyone else is focused on right now.
So we've looked at silence for self-mastery.
Right.
And strategic presence.
But some of our sources go even further.
Oh.
Using silence in interactions with others.
Okay.
Almost like psychological warfare.
Wow, that sounds intense.
It can be.
So how does that work?
Psychotic talks about how you can use silence to throw people off.
Okay.
They expect you to argue or get defensive. You don't.
And that's unsettling.
They don't know what to do.
It's like holding up a mirror.
Psychotic says that.
They're not getting the reaction they expected.
And they have to face their own.
Wow.
Their insecurities.
Their assumptions.
And it can really throw them.
And psychotic even talks about silence and interrogation.
Oh, wow.
We're just not talking.
Can create so much pressure.
That the person being interrogated just cracks.
They just want to break the silence.
And even on a smaller scale.
Just making someone wait.
Yeah.
Can be so powerful.
Like a power move.
Exactly.
It creates uncertainty.
The person waiting is in a weaker position.
Like a predator just watching its prey.
Now, here's something that's really counterintuitive.
Okay.
The magnetism of silence.
I don't get it.
Talking less.
Yeah.
And being less available.
Can actually make people more interested in you.
Yeah.
Oh, because they want what they can't have.
Exactly.
It's like scarcity.
If you're always around,
yeah,
you become common.
But if you're not,
you become valuable.
Interesting.
Psychotic even suggests trying it out.
You mean just being less available?
Yes, and see what happens.
And that takes a lot of self-control.
Right, because we all want to be seen.
We want validation.
But mastering this takes strength.
It's like that thing. What you chase runs away.
But what retreat
is pursued.
Psyche and Wisdom brings up a cool concept.
What's that?
The spotlight effect.
Okay.
It's this idea that we think everyone is always watching us.
Oh my gosh.
Like we're under a spotlight.
But in reality,
no one is paying that much attention.
Oh, thank goodness.
They're too worried about themselves.
Oh, that makes me feel so much better.
Psyche and Wisdom say that realizing this can really help.
How?
With social anxiety.
Because we're not always being judged.
And you can be yourself.
So it's like another way to reclaim power.
Exactly.
Okay, let's talk about Nietzsche's self-overcoming.
Okay.
Psychophil talks about this a lot.
It's about breaking free from
societal constraints.
Yeah.
The herd mentality.
And it starts with silence.
Oh.
In your own mind.
It's that quiet contemplation.
Where you examine your beliefs.
Your values.
And you figure out if they're really yours.
And Nietzsche's will to power.
So often misunderstood.
People think it's about dominating others.
But Psychophil explains it's not about that.
Okay.
It's about mastering yourself.
Growing.
Becoming a better version of yourself.
It's an internal drive.
Not about controlling others.
Like we see with silence.
It can be about influence.
But it starts from within.
And then there's embracing the void.
That sounds kind of scary.
It can be.
What does that even mean?
Psychophil talks about finding your own values.
Okay.
Not just accepting what everyone else tells you.
So you create your own meaning.
You decide what's important to you.
And the eternal recurrence.
That's a big one.
It is.
Psychophil says it's a way to really accept your life.
Every part of it.
The good and the bad.
Wow.
The question is, could you live this life over and over?
Forever.
And if you can say yes to that.
Yeah.
That's real power.
It's radical acceptance.
And that leads to strength.
So what about the Ubermensch?
The overman.
Where does silence fit in with that?
The Ubermensch achieves his potential through self-overcoming.
Okay.
It's constant growth.
Pushing past your limits.
Yeah. And Catharsis says that inner silence is key for that.
Because you need to control your own mind.
To master yourself.
So all this inner work, this silence, is the foundation for power.
Both internal and external.
And our sources, they talk about arguments as being...
psychological battles.
Oh, yeah. Psychophil and whispering ideas.
They say that a lot of arguments aren't about truth.
It's not about finding common ground.
It's about ego.
Protecting yourself.
Feeling superior.
It's about needing to be right.
More than understanding.
And like psychophil and catharsis say, when we react emotionally,
we lose control.
We become predictable.
We're not thinking clearly.
And that's where silence can be so powerful.
Psychophil and whispering ideas really get into this.
Using silence strategically.
It can really throw someone off.
Okay.
It creates uncertainty.
They don't know what to do.
And it can make them uncomfortable.
So it's the opposite of just reacting.
Instead of immediately defending yourself, pause.
Silence.
And that can be more powerful than any word.
And psychophil and whispering ideas also talk about how our brain
are always wired for logic.
Especially when we're arguing.
They talk about cognitive biases.
Oh, yeah.
Like confirmation bias.
The backfire effect.
The Dunning-Kruger effect.
All these things that make it hard to see clearly.
We look for information that confirms what we already believe.
Right.
And when someone challenges our belief,
we get defensive.
They dig in.
And it gets personal.
Because it's not just about the idea.
It's about who we are.
It's about our identity.
So psychophil says that really influential people,
they avoid emotional arguments.
They know it's a waste of energy.
Right.
Okay, so when should we actually engage in discussion?
And when should we just be silent?
Our sources give us some good guidelines.
Psychophil, whispering ideas, and psyche and wisdom.
Okay.
They all say that discussion is good for learning, for discovering truth.
For growth.
And for shifting power dynamic.
But silence is better when it's just about ego.
When the other person isn't open to new ideas.
When it's an emotional battle that's going nowhere.
Sometimes the best response is no response.
And our sources bring up this idea that words are like a
currency.
You have to spend them wisely.
Not waste them on arguments that don't matter.
It makes you think about those online debates.
Right.
That need to have the last word.
Maybe it's better to just step back.
To observe.
To analyze.
To be silent.
That seems to be the key takeaway from all this.
So to wrap up this deep dive.
What have we learned about the power of silence?
It's not about being the loudest.
It's about knowing when not.
It's about self-control.
It's about understanding how people interact.
It's about choosing your words carefully.
Not just reacting.
So for you, the listener.
Think about how you can use this.
When you feel that urge to speak, to defend yourself.
To be silent.
And see what happens.
See how you feel.
And see how others react.
In a world that's so noisy, what could your silent achieve?
Maybe it's the key to understanding.
To influence.
To inner peace.
It's a silent trick.
But maybe the most powerful one there is.
Maybe.